There are places not drawn on any map, places no one remembers. But sometimes, if you listen long enough, the forest begins to speak. I can't recall who first told me about the vanishing village. It could have been an old man in a roadside cafe on Highway 129, where coffee is hand-brewed and there's no Wi-Fi. Or maybe it was Emma, the woman who lives deep in the woods, where mobile signal is just a distant concept. But what I remember vividly is the feeling when I first heard the story, a chill down the spine, not because of the content, but because of how it was told quietly, in a whisper, as if the storyteller wasn't even sure it was real, yet couldn't forget it. It was the year 1932. Appalachia, the name itself, evokes an ancient melody, murmuring through the mountains. The oldest mountain range in North America, its bedrock predating even the dinosaurs, its forests untouched for millennia. Tennessee, the land of rivers, mist, and unnamed forest trails. In October of that year, a government geological survey team was dispatched to inspect mineral veins in the eastern mountains. The group numbered 5 young engineers and one aged guide named Hugh Benner, a World War I veteran who had since made a living by scouting minerals for mining companies. Their map was printed in 1928, detailed stream by stream, ridge by ridge, but it contained no hint of the village they would soon discover. On the third day of their survey, after trudging about 12 miles into the forest beyond their last marked point, they began noticing odd signs. Moss-covered stone walls, perfectly aligned trees as if planted with intention, and the faint scent of dried magnolia in the air, even though it was the middle of autumn. Hugh Benner was the first to spot wooden wheel tracks impressed in the damp dirt. Nothing like it had ever been seen on their previous expeditions. Then, as they crested a slight rise, the sight froze them all. A wooden village nestled quietly in a secluded valley with no roads leading to it, not a single power line or modern trace of civilization in sight. It was as if we'd stepped through a time portal. Excerpt from Chief Engineer Walter H. Levis's 1932 journal. With hair bound by faded silk, they neither greeted nor reacted to the surveyor's presence. They just stared, as if we, the newcomers, were alien intruders in their world. The villagers were clothes from the 1800s, linen cloaks, rough leather shoes, women, and official validation. I saw a woman standing under a wild apple tree. Not an old woman yet. Her eyes were beyond time, as if she had seen more than a person ought to see. This was Emma, or at least the name we later called her. She didn't introduce herself or ask questions. She spoke only one sentence when I asked about the village. Time is not as it used to be. We stayed in the village overnight. They didn't boss us around or chase us out. That night, not a machine's whir, not a single electric bulb. Only the whisper of wind through wooden beams and an old lullaby sung in archaic English, drifting like the forest's breath. At dawn, we left as we arrived quietly with promises to return, to bring maps. Witnesses. 7 days later, the survey team returned with 2 local officers and an anthropologist from Knoxville. But the village was gone. In its place lay a smoldering patch of blackened earth, ash and dust mingling with scorched grass and charred stones. And no signs of people, possessions, or footprints, except for one thing, a grandfather clock, lying tipped on the ground, and still ticking. There was no record of any such village in Tennessee's 1932 census or in any historical documents. No families, no paperwork, no missing persons. The silver bracelet found among the ashes bore an engraving, EM 1847. Each question led into silence. Each answer was swallowed by the forest. I'm not lying. I saw them. I heard them sing. Emma, when asked years later, for years afterward, the tale was retold like a legend, like a rumor. But those who had been there, who saw the village themselves, they never forgot. Because the disappearance was more than physical, it was a break in perception, a sense that people can exist alongside us in another dimension. And sometimes for reasons unknown, these 2 realms brush against one another. I remember Emma's final words to me, just before she vanished into the woods without a trace. Perhaps they never belonged to this era. We only happened to See them for a moment when the veil of time lifted just slightly. I never saw her again, but sometimes, standing in the Appalachian woods, I think I can hear the faint tick-tock of that clock still keeping time for a place that no longer exists in our world. When the Geological Survey team pushed deeper into the Appalachian forest on the morning of September 17, 1932, none of them suspected they were about to step into a place not found on any map, and perhaps not bound by any time. The path through the forest was a narrow, leaf-covered trail, damp and eerily still. There were no engine sounds, no hoof prints, only the soft crunch of boots against moss and the occasional whisper of wind weaving through the trees. Then, around a bend in the slope, the village appeared. No one said a word. Not because the village was grand or imposing, but because it shouldn't have been there. Wooden cabins with steeply pitched roofs stood clustered around a mossy stone well. A modest chapel with a crooked bell tower leaned slightly toward the east. Everything looked like it had been taken out of a 19th century illustration, weathered, quiet, and untouched by time. Then, the people came out. They stepped into the open, one by one, dressed in rough-spun linen, hand-stitched boots, straw hats, and long wool skirts. Children watched the survey team with curious eyes, but no one approached. No one smiled. Silence. And it was that silence that made the team's skin crawl. None of the surveyors were armed, but they instinctively tightened their grips on their tools, as if expecting anything to break the illusion. An older woman, with gray hair twisted into a high bun and skin weathered by sun and time, stepped forward. She stared at the group for a long moment before speaking in an oddly formal, old-fashioned English. "You are not from Quadrant 4. Captain James Rowley, the team leader, took a breath. "We're with the Tennessee Geological Authority. We weren't aware this area had residents. This village isn't on any record or map." The woman nodded slowly, as if that was to be expected. "Maps are ink and paper, but we do not chart our paths on parchment." A breeze stirred through the clearing, carrying the scent of old wood smoke, laced with something faintly herbal, mint, or maybe sage, floating from somewhere unseen. It felt wrong, or rather, out of place, like the village was an apparition gently breathing.
I still remember their eyes. They weren't afraid, nor excited, just like they had seen too many things already, and nothing left could surprise them. Abigail Saunders, the only known eyewitness still alive in 1972, gave this interview under a willow tree behind her daughter's home. There was a young woman standing beneath a chestnut tree. I asked her what year it was. She looked at me and said, "It's 1871, but I'm not sure anymore. Time isn't like it used to be." Abigail's voice trembled. The way they spoke, the way they moved, it felt like they were standing between worlds. Not fully here, but not quite gone.
The survey team stayed in the village until dusk. There were no wires, no machines, no signs of modern life. Even their tools were of blacksmith-forged iron and carved wood. When asked about the Great War, the villagers stared blankly. When asked about telegrams, electricity, President Roosevelt, no response. Only faint smiles, like distant echoes of a language they no longer spoke. That night, the team camped just outside the village edge. One member, William Hargrove, recorded in his field notebook, "The villagers seemed like they were waiting for something. They weren't scared. They didn't want anything from us. They didn't even ask why we were there. They just waited." By sunrise, the survey team departed with plans to return, this time with law officials and historians. They had no way of knowing that was the last time anyone would ever see the village. Narrator voice deep in 7 days later, the team returned. With them were 2 police officers, 3 journalists, and 2 historical researchers. The village was gone. No cabins, no well, no chapel, no wood, no stone, no footprints. Only a clearing burned faintly black, with ashes clinging to the grass and a single wooden pendulum clock still ticking in the center. There were no signs of movement, no trails, no cart marks, no drag lines, Sheriff George Nally later said, "It was as if the village never existed." Beneath the ashes, they found a single silver bracelet, faintly engraved with the initials. In the early days following the smoldering site, investigators, researchers, local police, and on-site scholars camped around the charred clearing day and night. They combed every inch of forest, sifted through ash and soil, but found no sign of houses, no footprints leading away, and no evidence of any means of departure or transportation. Not even everyday household items, pots, plates, cooking utensils were left behind. Everything seemed either to have turned to ash or vanished entirely. Despite scientific tests on soil, charcoal residues, and forest strata, the answer amazed and unnerved. No trace of farming, no sign of sustained living activity, nothing to suggest permanent occupation. Mystifying was the grandfather clock. Though its wooden casing had burned, the clock was still running, with no visible power source. Technicians found no batteries, power cables, or attachments. Its internal mechanism, gears and springs, were 19th century in style, utterly incompatible with any post-1900 manufacture. The silver bracelet, etched MCRS 1847, underwent detailed examination. Epigrapher Sylvia Kemp suggested Emmers might stand for a woman's initials, perhaps Mabel, Ruth, or Sarah, names common in the mid-19th century. The year 1847 also coincided with the region's first documented settler expansion, but significantly, no records match anyone with those initials in local archives. Folk believers in Appalachian traditions noted that inscribed silver bracelets were sometimes used as ritual keys, tokens spiritually bound to a person. The fact that silver survived the blaze while wood did not suggests a deliberate time magic or spiritual sealing ritual may have occurred the night the village vanished. No records exist of fires, storms, or seismic events in the week before the team returned. Yet geological surveys show a buried alluvial layer beneath the vanished village site, indicating a temporal fault line, possibly a region prone to disruptions in space-time. Theoretical physicists propose a folded space-time phenomenon. Layers of time, for example, 1847 and 1932, briefly overlapping, creating a temporal echo. In principle, the village's presence was a fleeting projection of a past era folding into the present. Dr. Marcus Helm, a physicist specializing in relativity and quantum phenomena, explains, "It's not sci-fi time travel. It's more like two sheets striking each other, touching and exchanging information, then sliding apart. A spectral flash, like a laser burn on frost." This could explain how an entire 19th century settlement appeared complete and intact, yet vanished without trace, like an image pressed on mist. Regional folklorists propose that the village may have performed an ancient ritual known as crossing the threshold. In this ceremony, a community would separate itself from the world to escape disease or calamity, existing in a liminal space. The ritual involved burning sacred wood, wearing inscribed metal tokens like the found bracelet, chanting archaic prayers, and standing within a designated living circle. The purpose? To lock time for that group, anchoring themselves in a parallel moment. If this is true, the survey team didn't find a lost village, they stumbled into a time gap. The villagers themselves may have willingly transitioned to another temporal plane, leaving no physical trail of departure. Journalists who arrived later said any photos or video they recorded came out fuzzy, like a faint veil of mist blurred every scene. Still frames looked like ghostly outlines seen through fogged windows. Emma later admitted she sometimes hears a mournful violin drifting through the Appalachian night, notes from another century, played just beyond earshot. Such accounts beg a disturbing question. Could time be like a fragile curtain, momentarily lifted, exposing glimpses of forgotten worlds? Long before the geological team set foot in those woods, local stories circulated in the valleys of eastern Tennessee. Tales whispered by front porch elders warned of a place where time forgets its path, an old settlement some said could be seen only during certain fogs or eclipses. One tale from 1899 described a hunter who stumbled across a quiet village at dusk. He was offered bread by a pale woman, who who spoke strangely, then vanished when he looked away. The man returned to the spot days later, with others. There was nothing but trees. These stories were dismissed as backwoods ghost tales. But when Emma, the young assistant surveyor, found a 1913 journal buried beneath moss by the creek, those tales gained weight. The journal, written in spidery ink, referenced a village called East Haven, yet no census, no land record, and no state archive mentioned such a place. One of the strangest phenomena recorded by the 1932 survey team involved auditory anomalies. In notes taken by Henry Paxton, the group's communications technician, several unexplained sound events were logged. Heard faint bell chiming from nowhere, 3:12 a.m. low chanting beneath wind. Multiple voices, unsourced. Twice we recorded static bursts that, when slowed down, resemble human whispers. Playback distorted, almost harmonic. Paxton theorized that the area could act as a kind of natural amplifier, rock formations resonating under certain humidity levels. But when he tried to recreate the sounds days later after the village's disappearance, nothing worked. Sound had been swallowed. In October 1934, 2 years after the incident, a hiker named Elbert Kane was reported missing near the same ridgeline. Search parties found his footprints leading into the woods, but not out. 5 days later, he walked out by himself, dazed but unharmed. When questioned, Kane claimed to have stayed in a village. Quiet folk, kind, wore strange clothes. The sky looked older. The stars were different. He pointed to a scar on his hand, bandaged by someone he called Miss Wren. Investigators thought he was hallucinating, but Kane described the silver bracelet, the engraved clock, and even drew the village's chapel tower matching sketches Emma had archived 2 years earlier. In 1968, Dr. Anya Hargrove, a physicist studying gravitational lensing, stumbled upon the East Haven report. She ran simulations based on the area's magnetic readings from 1932. The results were inconclusive, but they showed intermittent gravitational ripples, the kind expected near celestial bodies, not in Tennessee forests. She called it a low-frequency lensing event. Her theory: East Haven may be locked in a slow-motion fold of time, appearing only under precise environmental alignments, barometric pressure, humidity, solar wind. In those windows, it bleeds through, but the scientific community dismissed her as speculative. Her paper was buried until 1989, when military satellites recorded anomalous readings in that same region. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 14 seconds. Infrared scans revealed outlines of rectangular structures that vanished the next hour. Emma returned in the 1950s as a folklorist. She tracked down elders who remembered the old songs sung near the East Haven woods. An old widow named Clara sang a verse that froze Emma in place. Ring once for morning, ring twice for night. If third bell tolls, you fade from sight. Emma recognized it. One of the children in the village had sung the same melody in 1932.N01, could say where the rhyme came from. By 1972, Emma was no longer just a folklorist. Her name had become whispered among fringe historians, time theorists, and cryptographers. She had been quietly working with a small team of independent researchers, obsessed with ray mapping old regions of Appalachia where documented coordinates subtly shifted across decades. In one of her field trips near the suspected East Haven Ridge, Emma came upon something that changed everything. A locket. It was lying inside the hollow of a split cedar, polished as if just placed there. Inside, a sepia photograph of a woman in 1800s dress, holding a child, carved into the metal behind the photo. A name, Wren. It matched the name Elbert Kane had mentioned 40 years earlier. The woman who bandaged his wound in the vanished village. The locket was tested. No corrosion, no fingerprints. The photo paper dated between 1900 to 1920, but the dye used predated mass production. Dr. Julian Kessler, a mathematician fascinated by quantum irregularities, joined Emma's circle. He proposed an audacious idea. East Haven was not a place, but a temporal pocket, existing not in a constant location, but in intervals, like a breath. Using witness reports, geomagnetic anomalies, and archived meteorological data, he charted a rough map. Certain locations, under specific astronomical alignments, showed magnetic bleeding. Most were dismissed as coincidence, but in December 1975, a field camera set up on a ridge overlooking the last known site of Easthaven recorded 11 frames of something incredible: shadows of rooftops, smoke drifting, silhouettes moving behind curtains, then gone. The footage was analyzed by Kodak engineers. No tampering, no explanation. Among the artifacts recovered by Emma's team was a half-melted pendulum clock casing found buried in ash near the original site. Inside, an intact gearpiece bore an etching to fine for 19th-century tools. "We do not measure time, we remember it." Emma showed the piece to a retired horologist in Charleston. He fell silent, then whispered, "That's not engraving. That's microscopic lithography. It's ahead of us." He refused to touch it again. In the 1980s, reports surfaced of identical dreams shared by strangers across states, dreams of old wooden homes, fogged windows, a woman named Miss Wren humming a song no one could place. Psychologists called it mass suggestion, but Emma collected testimonies. A trucker from Arkansas, a librarian in Vermont, a child in Oregon, all described the same scent: smoke, pine, and bread baking. In one case, a 9-year-old girl woke up clutching a cloth button embroidered with the year 1847.N01, could explain where it came from. In 1992, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that a government team had briefly cordoned off the Easthaven site in 1963. The documents were heavily redacted, but one memo remained: stabilization impossible, subject to reversion, retrieval not recommended. Another referenced a missing notebook, Emma's 1932 field journal. Emma herself vanished from public life in the mid-1990s. Some say she moved to the Pacific Northwest. Others believe she returned to Tennessee and never came back. Her last published note read, "There is no past, only memory, and memory, I fear, has a door." There are places on this earth that never stay put, and there are people like Emma, like the villagers of Easthaven, who seem stitched not into time, but between its folds. Years have passed, the forest has changed, maps have shifted, but some nights, when the mist is heavy and the wind dies down, locals say the woods go quiet unnaturally, so as if listening. Old hunters refuse to camp near the ridge, and on more than one occasion, hikers have reported hearing something impossible: voices, harmonies, a woman humming a lullaby in a tongue they don't recognize. They turn to look. Nothing there, just trees. And yet, at the Oak Hollow Diner in Cross Forks, Tennessee, an old man sits near the window every Thursday night. His name is Ellis Ward. He worked with the County Roads Division in the 1960s. When asked about Easthaven, he only ever says one thing: "I still hear them when the fog rolls in low, singing like they never stopped." No one knows the tune, but somehow, everyone listening feels like they've heard it before, maybe in a dream, maybe in another life. In a museum in Nashville, locked inside a glass case, rests a silver bracelet engraved 1847, its surface unworn by time. Tour guides skim past it. There is no placard explaining its origin, but some children linger there, longer than they should. One boy once whispered to his mother, "She dropped it, she'll be back for it." We live in a world obsessed with explanations, with timestamps, documents, coordinates. But the story of Easthaven resists such cages, because Easthaven is not a place. It is a reminder, a whisper across decades, a question posed to the soul of every person who has ever looked out at a misty wood and felt something stir. A pull, a familiarity, an ache. Who were they? Why did they vanish? Did they ever truly exist? The truth is, we don't know, but perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps they were never meant to be understood, only remembered. Not through proof, but through presence. And so we leave you with this. If you ever find yourself lost in the Appalachians on a gray, drifting afternoon, if you catch the scent of wood smoke and pine, and hear faint music beneath the wind, don't be afraid. You haven't stumbled off the path. You've simply stepped through the veil. If time is not a straight line, then maybe, just maybe, we've already met them and just didn't know it.